Everybody, welcome to church from my side. We are starting a brand new series today called A Few Dead Men, and that's not trying to be morbid. We are taking a look at some of the prophets from the Old Testament and trying to see over the next several weeks how to take some of the lessons learned there and then, understanding what that is and what the context was, and bringing it into the here and now. And so just to offer a little bit of perspective in terms of where some of these books came in through the history or through the chronology of the Old Testament, it's important for us to kind of recognize some of the history. And so I'm going to try to give you a very, very brief, very quick sort of 30,000-foot view of creation to where we find ourselves with the prophets. So God created the earth, Adam and Eve, they had two sons, Cain and Abel. There was already civil war taking place right at the very beginning in the first family. Things pretty much went south from there. As people continued to reproduce, evil was prevalent. People had a choice, people had free will, and things got so bad that God actually decided to do a little bit of a factory reset with Noah and his family. That's where the flood came in, started over with Noah's family. And even then, we already see a little bit of dysfunction right from the very start. From there, this nation slowly, or people group starts to develop. We have then what is called the era of the patriarchs. You might be familiar with names like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was the twin brother of Esau. We'll come back to that in a moment. Jacob had eventually 12 sons, which became the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons was Joseph. You might know the story of where Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery. Just to be clear, the Bible does not have a lot of great examples of family. It is messed up. You'll have to look long and hard. It is incredibly messed up. Again, people have a choice. People have free will. And so Joseph is sold off into slavery, but we find out that God actually used that to help preserve his broader family and what would become the nation, the larger nation of Israel. And so they eventually moved to Egypt, where he became prime minister, helped them get through a famine. But they land up staying there for 400 years as slaves. That's where we then move into the book of Exodus, the second book of the Old Testament, and we meet Moses. God calls him to actually be his spokesperson and to go to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to demand that he actually releases God's people, which at that stage was this broader nation of Israel. He resists, and so we have then what is the 10 plagues, and eventually he lets them go. We have the parting of the Red Sea. They then move into the wilderness, and an 11-day journey, what should have taken them 11 days to get from Egypt to the Promised Land, actually became a 40-year journey. Again, because people have free will, people have a choice, and so there was a lot of unlearning to be done and a lot of new learning to be done, and they were constantly given opportunity after opportunity to trust and obey God, and frankly, they messed it up most of the time, just like many of us. Then, eventually after the 40 years, they begin to possess the Promised Land. We have the period of the judges. Some of the names involved there would be familiar to you. But then eventually, we have the prophet Samuel, and people started saying, no, we want a king like the other nations. And so then God relents eventually, because God often will allow us to get what we demand. He gives us free will. And so Saul is made king. Saul becomes a pretty corrupt king. David is anointed king. David was doing very well for a long time, and then he messed up horribly, tragically. And again, his family is a mess. His son Solomon takes over, and then eventually Solomon's son took over from his dad, and he was arrogant and proud and basically caused the division of the nation. And what was 12 tribes was split up into 10 tribes, which became known as Israel, and they were the northern tribes. And then Benjamin and Judah became known as the southern tribes, or simply referred to as Judah. The northern tribes had Samaria as their capital. Judah had Jerusalem as their capital. And again, lots of failure, little bits of success. God keeps warning them, giving them chance after chance, choice after choice. It's actually ridiculous how relentlessly patient God was and still is with us. And it's during this period, as the tribes have been separated, as they have some really dysfunctional kings and a handful of decent kings, and in some cases, you'll see in the weeks ahead, the northern tribes are eventually taken captive. Later on, the southern tribes are taken captive as well. And it's kind of in between all of this period that we have some of the prophets coming and speaking into these different contexts. Now, you might have heard of the term major prophets, minor prophets. Just so you know, the major prophets are not the big dogs, and the minor prophets, the guys that are still figuring out, their apprenticeship. All that this refers to is the size of the book. So the 4 major prophets are the guys that wrote really large chunks of scripture with dozens and dozens of chapters. People like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Whereas the 12 minor prophets were guys that wrote much smaller books. People like Hosea, who we'll hear about next week, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, who we'll hear about today, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. I do remember being in the western province of Zambia several years ago and finding out that sometimes some of the locals would call like the really significant, who they thought were the significant prophets, the major prophets, and kind of the still learning the ropes guys, the minor prophets. And we were like, no, that's not really how it works. Anyway, so the books, as you would find them in the contents page of your Bible, if you have a paper Bible, are not listed chronologically. In fact, sometimes you'll find that some of the different books, some of the different prophets actually appear in between some of the accounts found in the historical accounts of 1 and 2 Chronicles, 1 and 2 Kings. I know this sounds like a lot of information. Hang in there. You'll understand why in a moment. But the book that we are looking at today is actually literally the shortest book in the Old Testament, the book of Obadiah. It's got 1 chapter. We don't know anything about him, excepting that God brought a message to him that he wanted him to communicate to the nation of Edom. Now, what really matters is that Edom, or the Edomites, were descendants of Esau, and remember that the Israelites were the descendants of Jacob. So for all intents and purposes, they were family, like blood family. They were cousins. And you would imagine that under normal circumstances, they should have each other's back and be protecting each other and supporting each other. But just like their ancestors, Jacob and Esau, were fighting pretty much from birth and continued to Esau was the more kind of aggressive, Jacob was the more deceptive and manipulative, and he was. Guys, there was so much brokenness and dysfunction. But even though they appeared to make up later on in life, it would appear as though a lot of the dysfunction trickled down through the generations. And because of the evil, destructive, and horrific way that the Edomites kept treating the Israelites, God, through Obadiah, actually brings a message of doom. Like it's not like a warm and fuzzy, comfortable type of book to be read. Rather, it is a book that actually shows us that just because God is patient, and just because God warns and warns and warns and warns and warns, doesn't mean that he won't ultimately stick to his word. Yeah. The New Testament puts it this way in Galatians 6, verse 7, God won't be mocked. Right. You will reap what you sow. And I think sometimes we water down how serious we think God is because he's not doing it right now. And so because we're not suffering consequences right now, because we don't feel like we're experiencing judgment right now, we can kind of be lulled into thinking that God doesn't have to actually be taken that seriously. Now, just in case you're getting nervous, this is not a doom and gloom, fear, shame message, but I am wanting us to kind of manage this tension where we recognize that actually God in his grace and kindness warns and warns and warns, invites. But somewhere along the line, God will honor our choices. We all have a choice, we all have free will, and it will ultimately be honored. So, we read kind of early on in this single chapter of the book of Obadiah that judgment is being announced. We read in verse 3, you have been deceived by your own pride. This is ultimately the message of Obadiah. Pride and justice, the justice of God. But it all begins with their pride. They were deceived by their own pride. Because you live in a rock fortress and make your home high in the mountains, who can ever reach us way up here, you ask, boastfully. But even if you soar as high as eagles and build your nest among the stars, I will bring you crashing down, says the Lord. Now, at face value, that just sounds like a very hectic threat. But I want you to understand that this, again, is in the context of generation after generation after generation of warning, pleading, inviting, cautioning. And God has gotten to a point where He's saying to them, you've got so much pride in your own ability. You've got so much pride in your own power. You have so much pride in how high and protected and lofty your place in the world is, because they were quite literally living in a geographically secure area. We've actually got some photos that we'll put up behind me in a moment, which is found in today's modern-day Petra in modern-day Jordan. And you'll actually see that this particular monastery or cathedral is actually carved into the mountain. Like, you talk about secure, like they weren't using building materials. They were carving into the mountain. This is another section, and it's kind of found in this very large circular area. You'll see in a moment that there are some further caves and tombs and temples also carved into the mountain. And then lastly, you'll see this crag that people would have to go through. I don't know if that's clear enough, but if people wanted to come in to attack the people of Edom, they would have to come through this very narrow crag. People could just be standing at the very top of the mountain and they could fire down on them, or they could throw rocks down on them. It was pretty much impenetrable. Like, it was legit. Yeah. They were powerful. They were protected. And for that reason, they put their pride, they put their confidence in what they had, not in God. Yeah. Quite literally thinking, well, like in a way, God couldn't even defeat us Himself. A little bit like the creators of the Titanic, right? Even God, it was documented them saying that even God couldn't sink the Titanic. It didn't last one trip. It hit an iceberg. Like one iceberg, one little piece of God's creation. And every now and then we will hear the rhetoric, the narratives of people in places of power or influence where you kind of get this sense of, whoa, easy target. Like, you're starting to mock God. Yeah. For you to think you're untouchable, for you to think that because of everything that you have at your disposal, that you can be your own God, you're in danger. And so in verse 15, we read further, the day is near when I, the Lord, will judge all godless nations. So not just Edom, but all godless nations, one day. We don't know when all of those particular moments in history have been or will be, but one day, all nations will be judged. And in this case, he's explaining to them the reason for the judgment because of how they treated their cousins in this particular context. As you have done to Israel, so it will be done to you. And I'm needing us to dig deep and not to be thinking in terms of 21st century politics or geography or world powers, but to be thinking in the context of the Old Testament at this stage, prior to Easter, prior to the cross. These people were invited to be the people of God. And anyone that were willing to join them in worshiping God were seen as the people of God. And so in this case, God's saying to them, hey, I won't be mocked. What you keep doing to them will eventually be done to you. And so we see this unpacked a little bit in verse 10. Because of the violence to your close relatives in Israel. And it was the people who you should be protecting the most. And we're going to come to the here and now, because there are people that we should be protecting, by the way. Because of the violence you did to your close relatives in Israel, you'll be filled with shame and destroyed forever. When they were invaded, you stood aloof, indifferent. Just so you know, that should be an alarm bell for us, when we can stand by completely indifferent to injustice, to suffering. You stood aloof, refusing to help them. Foreign invaders carried off their wealth and cast lots to divide up Jerusalem, but you acted like one of Israel's enemies. In other words, you sided with the enemy. You should not have gloated when they exiled your relatives to distant lands. You should not have rejoiced when the people of Judah suffered such misfortune. You should not have spoken arrogantly in that terrible time of trouble. The Edomites were glad to see their relatives suffer. And in some cases, even got involved in helping the enemy to further harm and defeat their distant family. Verse 13 says, you should have plundered the land of Israel. You should not have plundered the land of Israel when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have gloated over the destruction when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have seized their wealth when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads killing those who tried to escape. You should not have captured the survivors and handed them over in their terrible time of trouble. And in Amos, another small little minor prophetic book, we also read in chapter 1, verse 11, about how they were actually, with their swords, literally slashing the Israelites, like they were attacking them. Now, it's easy for us to read some of these things and to be shocked or horrified. It's a lot easier for us to read modern-day accounts, to read news reports, to see things on social media, and to be outraged by some of the injustices and some of the aggression that people meter out against others. The challenge for us is to take the there and then and bring it into the here and now. The challenge is for us not to put all of our energy into evaluating the pride and arrogance of others, but to look in the mirror and say, God, where might I feel justified in being proud and arrogant, in feeling superior, in exploiting others? If I even just think of some of those terms that we've just read, the idea of gloating when someone is suffering is like pouring salt in the wounds. Or if we think of them rejoicing at their calamity, isn't that in some part a little bit of what gossip is? We can't gossip without being proud. We can't gossip without feeling that we are somehow superior. When they talk about having spoken arrogantly, that's to be superior, dismissive, and indifferent. Or to plunder and seize their wealth. Modern day, that would be us exploiting people's vulnerability. I think of tiny examples over the years where I've seen personalities almost delight in the ability to get somebody who's already earning minimum wage to cut their costs even further so that they get a good deal. And I'm thinking that if you remove yourself, if you step back for a moment and you think objectively, when someone who's earning 100 times more or 1,000 times more than this person is celebrating that they were able to shave off another 10 Rand or 20 Rand or 50 Rand or 100 Rand, is that not an element of pride and superiority and like a distance from the humanity of another person? That's exploitation. When they make reference to having killed or captured, I think in a modern day context, that'd be very much like us joining in the mob mentality, particularly online. And that's not to say that there are not certain causes and certain fights that need to be had, but how? And am I thinking through this objectively, or am I getting swept up in this mob mentality, in this overall outrage, which probably has some truth in it? But where I'm at risk of actually being arrogant and proud in how I am adding my voice to this particular disturbance. See, this is what's so tricky about pride, is that it is not so much what I do as much as the motive behind it, as much as the thinking behind it, as much as my heart attitude, my mindset. And the reality is that Christians should intervene, never rejoice in the face of suffering and injustice. And just so you know, in case you're thinking, whoa, like why is Israel being so protected? Was God like an overprotective parent? The answer is no. He held Israel to the exact same standard. In Deuteronomy 2 verse 45, as well as chapter 23 verse 7, he warns the Israelites never to harm their cousins, never to harm the Edomites. And throughout the Old Testament, they are warned as to how they treat the vulnerable, how they treat the oppressed, the exploited. So just to be clear, nobody is exempt. Nobody is exempt. So if we take a little bit of the there and then and bring it into the here and now, there are plenty of passages that address or caution us against pride as a whole. Well known would be Proverbs 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. Or if you are familiar with some of the kings of Israel and Judah, reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you might have come across the story of Uzziah, who was actually a good king. This is what's so scary. In a long list of horribly dysfunctional, arrogant kings, Uzziah was actually a good guy. Yeah. At first. We read in the second part of 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verse 15. His fame spread far and wide. Look at this. For the Lord gave him marvelous help. And he became very powerful. But when he became powerful, he also became proud, which led to his downfall. There are, in my opinion, this is subjective. In my opinion, there are very few people that I think have the character to cope with extraordinary success, prosperity, influence, power. Like it is not easy. It is not easy to maintain a mindset of, God, you've given me the ability. God, you've given me opportunity, or you've given me influence, or you've given me this personality, you've given me this gift, you've given me these opportunities. It is not easy to remain humble. James 4 verse 6 simply says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So when I'm proud, you might think I'm fighting somebody else. I'm actually fighting God. God opposes the proud. And Romans 12 verse 16 says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. In other words, as far as society, in your particular context, where somebody might think that these people are of a lower standing, are you able to see the intrinsic value of every single person? Yeah. Objectively, sure. Different people might have different skills, different gifts, different abilities, different influences, different networks, different experiences. But at its core, every single person matters. And it's only pride and arrogance that can treat a group of people as though they are less than. Ever. Now, before I get quite practical with us, let me just get to the end of the story and tell you that in the end, the Edomites were wiped out. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't the next day, it wasn't the next week, but over time, according to many, many scholars, there is no single Edomite that still exists. They were eventually all wiped out. And as harsh as that may sound, I think that was sowing and reaping. God warned and warned and warned and warned. God won't be mocked. God opposes the proud. So maybe we should take pride seriously. If this was one whole dedicated book of the Bible, and again, this is one of the themes of the Bible, because I think that pride is the foundation to every sin. I think that pride is underneath everything. Greed, lust, everything. Yeah. Exploitation, envy. It's I want, I deserve, it's me. Whereas humility is the foundation of all the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Humility is not one of the fruit of the Spirit because it is the foundation of all the fruit of the Spirit. Humility is me trusting God, surrendering to God, wanting to honor God. So, a couple of quick ideas in terms of the warnings against pride for us in the here and now. First, pride is a reflection of our view of God. We might think that it's our view of the person or people, but it's actually our view of God. Who do I trust? Who do I revere? Who am I wanting to honor? Am I even open to God helping me address this conflict, this difficult situation, this injustice, this outrage? Am I even open to Him helping me pursue this in a God-honoring way? Because it might be the right thing, but pursued in the wrong way. It shows my view of God. Secondly, pride feeds entitlement. Hectic. pride feeds entitlement. Some of you know the story of Jacob and Esau, and where things really blew apart was when Esau was willing to give up his birthright, because he was born like seconds or minutes before Jacob, and so technically he was the firstborn, and he had an inheritance coming to him. And he comes home from the field one day and he's hungry and he's like, Jacob, give me food or I'll die. No, you won't. Don't be a diva. But he felt so entitled to his appetite in that moment that he was vulnerable to the manipulation of Jacob, where he said, I will give you if you give me your birthright. Pride can deceive us. It can confuse us. It can make us feel so entitled to what my body or my mind is craving right now that I'm willing to compromise. Pride makes us feel entitled. David Pawson, in his book Unlocking the Bible, says Esau lived for the present, for the immediate satisfaction of his physical desires, and lost his future. Pride will make us so distracted with what we are wanting right now and craving right now, I think we are owed and deserved right now, that we actually could forfeit our future. One of the most, for me at least, inspiring, humbling, encouraging, like anchoring reference passages in Scripture when it comes to everything that we're talking about. In this particular case, it's referring to finances and our ability to produce wealth and where we believe it comes from and all the rest. I find this in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 10. This is Moses, God through Moses warning the Israelites. They've just come through 40 years of wilderness wandering, and they're about to go into the promised land. They're about to experience prosperity, and he's warning them. He's warning them. When you have eaten your fill, Deuteronomy 8, verse 10, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he's given you, because he's the source. He's where it comes from. But that is the time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty, you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations, and decrees that I am giving you today. For when you have become full and prosperous and have built fine homes to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud and forget the Lord your God who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. Do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, where it was so hot and dry. He gave you water from a rock. He fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to your ancestors. He did this to humble you and test you for your own good. He did all this so you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful, in order to fulfill the covenant he confirmed to your ancestors with an oath. I like how the NIV puts verse 18. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. That takes humility. That is a humble conviction. God, there's nothing I can give to you that you haven't given to me first. There's nothing that I can steward that isn't at its core initially from you. That is stewardship. That is gratitude. You cannot feel entitled and grateful at the same time. Yeah. It's impossible. You cannot feel entitled and grateful at the same time. Number 3, pride is the opposite of love. Quite literally, it is the opposite of love. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Humility is key to love. Number 4, pride feeds superiority. Pride says that I am more important, I'm more valuable, or I'm more worthy. Even think about the idea of me withholding forgiveness from someone. I'm not talking about reconciliation. That's completely different. And I'm not talking about trust. That's completely different. But for me to withhold forgiveness from someone else at its worst means I want them to go to hell type of thing. I'm not talking about justice. I'm not talking about I'm just saying for me to withhold forgiveness from somebody else, it does reflect a sense that I'm somehow more worthy of forgiveness than what this person is. That's pride. I cannot exploit another human being without pride. I cannot gossip without somehow feeling superior. And pride is at the root of all prejudice. Superiority is at the root of all prejudice. You cannot be racist without feeling superior to that race. You cannot be sexist without feeling superior somehow to that gender. Classism, tribalism, xenophobia, the oxygen that feeds those fires is superiority, which is based on pride. Number 5, pride feeds vengeance as opposed to justice. They're very different. I want to be clear. There is a place for justice. Society needs justice. But justice is not the same as vengeance. Vengeance, perhaps, if I'm going to oversimplify it, is where you break my finger, I'm going to break your life. Like it's multiplied. It is compounded. And we see examples of this in Scripture. Jacob's sons, remember he had 12 sons? All of them, perhaps besides Joseph, because he wasn't around, they sold him into slavery. And Benjamin was still very young. But particularly Simeon and Levi, we read in Genesis chapter 34. Their sister was a victim, proper, legitimate victim of an injustice. She was raped. Evil, demonic. It should demand justice. But justice wasn't enough for them. So they managed to deceive the rapist and all of his fellow townsmen and the males from the families around them into becoming circumcised. And while they were vulnerable, they went in and they slaughtered every male in that village. Was it wrong? Was it evil? Was it unjust? What he did to their sister, to Jacob's daughter? Absolutely. Did that justify them wiping out every male in that village? The answer is no. Samson, who is probably like the archetype of pride. And by the way, God still used him. Don't ever be lulled into deception thinking that just because God's using you that he approves of your character. He doesn't. Doesn't mean he approves of your character. He can use a donkey. Y'all. He can use a donkey. Samson was proud. And we see that entitlement when he demands of his parents that they bring him a pagan girl, someone that he knows he shouldn't be marrying. Literally, his words are, "She looks good to me. I want her. Go get her." That's pride. That's entitlement. And again, like I said, there's virtually no examples of good family, so the parents give in to his tantrum type whim. And so he's arranged to be married to her. During the wedding celebrations, which last for 7 days, he is given 30 men as companions from her village. And because he's proud, he wants to impress them with his intellect, and so he proposes an agreement. He's about to offer them a riddle, and he says if they can figure the riddle out by the end of the week, he will give them 30 outfits, 30 luxury outfits for the 30 men. But if they can't figure it out by the end of the week, then they have to give him 30 luxury outfits. And they agree to it, but after a few days, they start getting worried, and so they start threatening his fiancée to get the answer from Samson, to tell them, which eventually she gives into because of the threat. And so they give Samson the answer, and he's so outraged that he goes and kills 30 men to get their outfits. He feels entitled to his rage. He feels entitled to kill 30 innocent men. He's having a tantrum. Yeah. And then he goes home and he sulks. He's like, I'm not going to, he doesn't fulfill the marriage commitment to this fiance. He goes home with mommy and daddy. And then somewhere later, when his mood has settled, he goes back to get her. He goes to her father's house and says, where's my wife? I want to sleep with her. Guys, it's just gross. And the father's like, he's buffering. It's like, I thought you were done. I thought you didn't want to. I allowed her to get married to somebody else. And so, again, he's outraged. And he wipes out all the crops, all the vineyards, the olive groves of the Philistines. He's upset with one man, and so he wipes out all the vegetation, all the agriculture of the villages around them. So then, because they think it's justice, the Philistine men then get this ex-fiancée and her father, and they kill them. They put them in the house, they burn them. Guys, this is in the Bible. The Bible's not boring, just so you know. I mean, it's pretty gross at times, but it's not boring, that's for sure. It can be disturbing, but it's not boring. So then, when Samson finds out about this, as though he's noble, he's so offended that he goes and he murders a whole bunch of Philistine men. Tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. Well, actually, it's not. It's touch me, I destroy a whole bunch. Touch me again, it's so disproportionate. So then, the Philistines encamp around Judah and this particular part that Samson's from. So 3,000 men of Judah go and find Samson and beg him to please come and settle this stuff. So he's like, okay, tie me up, but don't kill me yourself. So they bring him to the Philistines, and then he breaks free of the ropes, grabs the jaw of a donkey, and kills 1,000 men. That's vengeance. Yeah. That's not justice. It all began with my fiance didn't have my back when I was trying to one-up the 30 men. She shared my riddle. Thousands of people are killed. That is vengeance. That is not justice. That is superiority. I'm entitled. That is not justice. I know that this is sensitive, so I'm hoping that you'll give me some grace. But this is got nothing to do with policies or politics or the different governments. I'm just telling you that when the President of the United States at the beginning of this week can boldly claim that he will destroy an entire civilization in one night, that's arrogance. That is not okay. That's vengeance. I am not disputing or protecting the threats of the Iranian government and leaders who want to destroy other nations and say that they want to wipe them. I'm not defending how human rights are trampled on. I'm just saying that it's one thing to take out the threat. It's another thing to threaten to take out a whole civilization. That is not self-control. That is not measure. That is like for me, that's like a bit of a tantrum. And it's easy for us to notice and to respond to stuff that's going on around us or in the world. Guys, we have to look in the mirror. Yeah. Where am I tempted to respond disproportionately? And lastly, pride stops us from depending on God. This is the bottom line. Pride makes me depend on myself, on my ability, on my influence, on my intellect, on my charisma, on my charm, on my ability to power up and get stuff done. And what's scary is that there are elements of truth in that thinking because there is appropriate responsibility. I should be diligent. I should be a good steward of what I have in my hand. But the moment I put all of my faith in that, the moment I depend on that, that's what Proverbs 3 verse 5 is talking about when it says, do not depend on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him. Yeah. Humility at its core is a dependence on God. I am surrendering to Him. I am seeking to obey, to trust, to honor. The late C.S. Lewis put it this way in his classic book, Mere Christianity. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. In fact, earlier on in this quote, which we don't have there, he makes reference to all the other sins as flea bites in comparison to pride. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. As long as you are proud, you cannot know God. And then look at this. A proud man is always looking down on people. And of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. Pride stops us from depending on God. At its core, our invitation to follow Jesus involves learning to trust and obey. Doing what we can. We have agency, we have responsibility, we have to steward those things, but ultimately depending on God, leaving the outcomes to Him. The worship team can come on up. I want to offer you 4 very quick ideas as to how we can starve pride. This is not long. First is service. I think that we can actually starve the cancer of pride by actually committing to service. Something happens inside of me when I'm responsible to other people, when I'm responsible to another team, or when I'm responsible to people that I'm committing to helping or serving or loving or educating or whatever the case is. Secondly, pride is starved, perhaps more than anything else, through anonymity. In other words, where some of the stuff I do, whether it's an act of generosity, whether it's doing a chore that no one's asked me to do, whether it's an act of service to some random person, whether it's giving financially somewhere, for some of those things to be completely anonymous, where it's not leaked out somehow by accident. Listen, that starves pride. That starves my motive. That reminds me that I'm actually ultimately doing it for an audience of one. That's reminding me that though no one else may know, God knows. God knows your heart. That's why even with service, only God actually knows if it's service. You might know, but only God knows the real motive of our hearts. And so that's why I'm saying, especially when it's something that's anonymous, where we're not taking the credit for everything. It's like you actually feel yourself losing weight. It just makes some of that stuff smaller, which needs to be made smaller. Third, and this might sound weird to some of you, is manners. Manners. Actually being polite, being courteous. Saying sorry, saying please, saying thank you. If you're not going to make it, excusing yourself. If you're running late, apologizing. These are little things that humble us. Is that getting a little too close to home? When somebody does something for you, can you say thank you? And if you can't, why? If you know that you're wrong at something, can you say sorry? And if not, why? Can you allow people to help you? And if not, why? And then lastly, very simply, ask for God's help. Ask Him constantly. God, I need you. God, I don't even know what I don't know. I need you. I need you. I want you. Please give me the desire and the power to do it. Please, you point out anything in me right now that you're wanting to address in my life that's offending you. Lead me on the path of everlasting life. God, help me not to depend on my own understanding. Help me to acknowledge you in every part of my life. God, help me to surrender to you. Would you speak to me? Would you show me? And as you show me, help me to recognize your voice from the other influences in my life, and help me to grow in hearing, trusting, and obeying. God gives grace to the humble. Why would we want anything less? God gives grace to the humble. Won't you stand with me, please?